He had paid for the world's best specialists, for the most advanced diagnostic machines, for the entire top floor of the city's most exclusive private hospital. He had bought silence, privacy, and the illusion of control. But he had not paid for this. He had not, and could not, have ever anticipated the quiet girl in the dark green scrubs. From his seat in a sterile security office 2 floors down, Lorenzo Romano watched the monitor. His mother, Sophia, a woman who had once commanded a room with a single glance, lay still and pale against the white linens. For weeks, she had been lost in a fog of illness, unresponsive and unreachable. The nurses came and went, efficient and detached, their movements crisp with professionalism that felt like another form of neglect. But this one was different. She moved with a gentle economy, her hands sure but soft as she adjusted his mother's pillows. And then, when her tasks were done, she did not leave. She pulled a chair close to the bed, her posture weary, but her focus absolute. A low, sweet sound began to fill the silent room, a melody that was achingly familiar, a lullaby from a forgotten time. He leaned closer to the screen, his entire body tightening. The girl was singing. It was not a performance. Her voice was soft, unadorned, and threaded with a profound, unasked-for tenderness. He watched, a strange and unfamiliar pressure building in his chest, as his mother's hand, limp for a month, twitched upon the blanket. The girl didn't see it. She just kept singing, her eyes full of a compassion he hadn't known existed in this world, and certainly not for sale. Lorenzo Romano, a man who owned everything, felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He was watching something pure and true, something that had no price. And his first violent and absolute thought was that he had to have it. The day had begun with the taste of rust and panic. Rose pulled on her worn dark green scrubs in the pre-dawn chill of her apartment, the crumpled eviction notice on her kitchen counter burning a hole in her vision. 72 hours. That's what it said. The words felt like a physical blow. At 19, she was already an expert in the cruel arithmetic of survival, of stretching a nurse's aide paycheck across rent, utilities, and instant noodles, with nothing left over. The hospital was her only refuge, a place where her competence mattered more than the fraying cuffs of her uniform. When the head nurse had offered her the extra shift, the warning had been clear. The patient in the penthouse suite, Mrs. Romano. She's particular.
Or her family is.
They've gone through 5 nurses in a week. But the pay differential is significant. Significant was an understatement. It was the difference between a roof over her head and the street. So Rose had said yes, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She'd walked onto the secured floor, passing 2 immense men in sharp suits who watched her with blank, assessing eyes. The room itself was less a hospital room and more a luxury hotel suite, filled with the low, rhythmic hum of monitors. In the center of it all was the old woman, looking as fragile as a bird. The file said she was unresponsive, lost in the aftermath of a severe illness. The previous nurse's notes were terse, uncooperative, agitated when touched. Rose saw only a woman who looked profoundly lonely. She began her work, her movements slow and deliberate, speaking to the still figure in a low, calm voice, explaining every touch before she made it. After she had finished her clinical tasks, cleaning and repositioning the frail woman with a gentleness that was second nature, Rose felt the oppressive silence of the room settle around her. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, full of unspoken grief. She looked at Sophia Romano's face, the lines of a life well-lived etched around a mouth now slack and still, and a wave of empathy washed over her. This woman wasn't just a patient file or a paycheck. She was a mother, a grandmother, someone who was loved so fiercely that her son had surrounded her with a fortress of wealth and security. Yet here she lay, alone in the final, intimate sense of the word. Rose thought of her own grandmother, of the songs she used to sing when Rose was a child, sick with a fever. Without a conscious decision, she began to hum one of them, a simple, ancient folk melody about a river flowing to the sea. The sound was small in the large room. Seeing no change in her patient, but feeling a rightness in the act itself, she let the hum soften into words. Her voice was not trained, but it was clear and true, a thread of warmth in the sterile air. "Sleep now, little one. The moon is high," she sang softly, her eyes on the old woman's face, pouring all the desperate hope and tired compassion of her own young life into the simple tune. She was so lost in the moment, in the memory and the act of giving, that she didn't notice the faint flutter of Sophia's eyelids. She didn't feel the sudden, intense shift in the atmosphere, the feeling of being watched not by a camera, but by a predator that had just caught an impossible scent. She simply sang for the lonely woman, an offering from one soul to another, completely unaware that the woman's son was now standing, silent as death, in the doorway behind her. Lorenzo had waited until the song was finished. He stood in the shadow of the doorframe, every muscle in his body coiled tight. He had heard the melody through the speaker in the security room, and something in its simple purity had drawn him up, compelled him to see it with his own eyes. He watched her sing, this girl with tired eyes and hands that were impossibly gentle, and felt a crack appear in the icy armor he had spent a lifetime building. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was different. It was charged, heavy with his presence. Rose felt it first, a prickle on the back of her neck. She turned, and her breath caught. The man in the doorway was the one she had seen in passing, the one whose power was a palpable force field. Up close, he was overwhelming. Tall and broad, dressed in a suit so exquisitely tailored it looked like a second skin, he radiated an aura of absolute control and lethal stillness. His eyes, a dark, fathomless brown, were fixed on her. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of any discernible emotion, yet it vibrated through her. "I'm Rose. The agency sent me," she stammered, her professionalism a thin shield against his intensity. "I'm the aide for this shift." He took a step into the room, his gaze sweeping from her face to his mother, then back again. He ignored her title, her explanation. "Why were you singing?" The question was flat, an interrogation. Rose flushed.
"I'm sorry."
She seemed distressed. "Sometimes music helps." He moved to the bedside, his large hand gently touching his mother's forehead. His touch, for all his intimidating presence, was surprisingly tender. "She has not responded to anything in a month," he stated, not looking at Rose, but she knew the words were for her. "Leave us." It was a dismissal as sharp and final as the closing of a vault. Rose gathered her things, her hands trembling slightly, and fled the room, his dark, unreadable eyes following her every step. Downstairs, Lorenzo picked up his phone. Dante, his most trusted man, answered on the first ring. "The new nurse," Lorenzo said, his voice quiet but laced with steel. "I want to know everything about her." The next morning, as Rose was preparing to clock in for her shift, the head nurse called her into her office. A large, expensive-looking shoebox sat on the desk. "This was delivered for you," the older woman said, her eyebrows raised in curiosity. Rose stared at it, bewildered. "For me? I didn't order anything, the card just says Rose," the nurse replied, pushing it toward her. With hesitant fingers, Rose lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in crisp tissue paper, was a pair of state-of-the-art nursing clogs, the kind she'd seen in catalogs but could never dream of affording. They were ergonomically designed, built for comfort and support, a universe away from the cheap, worn-out sneakers she wore every day. Tucked inside one of the shoes was a small, plain white card. There was no signature, just 3 typed words. "For your work." A chill went down her spine. It could only be from one person. The gesture felt both incredibly kind and deeply unsettling. It was too intimate, too observant. He had noticed her shoes. He had seen her poverty and had, with a casual flex of his wealth, erased one of its symptoms. "I can't accept these," Rose said, her voice barely a whisper. "Nonsense," the head nurse scoffed. "Someone is obviously impressed with your work with Mrs. Romano. Consider it a well-deserved bonus." Defeated, and knowing a refusal would only draw more attention, Rose took the box. She spent the day on edge, wearing the new shoes that felt alien on her feet. They were absurdly comfortable, but every step felt like she was walking on borrowed ground. Late in the afternoon, Lorenzo Romano appeared again. He stood by his mother's bed, speaking to her in low, soft Italian. Rose busied herself on the other side of the room, pretending to check for drips. She was acutely aware of him, of the way the air crackled with his presence. He said nothing to her, but as he turned to leave, his gaze dropped pointedly to her feet for a single, charged second. Then his eyes met hers, and a silent, terrifying message was exchanged. I see you. I provide for you. You are mine to care for. He walked out without a word, leaving Rose with her heart hammering against her ribs, feeling more owned than grateful. The shoes were a temporary balm on a mortal wound. 2 days later, the final eviction notice appeared, taped to her door, its red lettering like a scream. Her landlord, a sour man who knew her situation, refused any more extensions. The money from the extra shifts wasn't enough, not nearly enough to cover the back rent and fees he was demanding. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. She worked a double shift, her body screaming with exhaustion, her mind a frantic mess of calculations and dead ends. She was in the nearly empty hospital cafeteria late that night, staring into a cup of lukewarm coffee she couldn't afford, when a shadow fell over her table. It was him. Lorenzo sat down opposite her without an invitation, his presence sucking all the air from her small corner of the room. You look tired, Rose, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I'm fine, she lied, her voice thin. He ignored her denial. I know about your apartment, he said, his voice low and devoid of pity. I know about the eviction notice. Rose's blood ran cold. The surveillance, the intrusion, it went far beyond noticing her shoes. He had pried into the private, humiliating details of her life. How, she started, but he cut her off. It is my business to know things. He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes pinning her in place. I have a proposition for you. My mother is showing signs of improvement. The doctors say it is your presence. Your methods. He paused. I want you to be her exclusive, full-time nurse. You will live in my home. My mother will be discharged to my care. You will want for nothing. Your financial difficulties will be resolved. The offer hung in the air, a lifeline made of golden chains. Live in his home. The thought was both terrifying and, in her desperation, intoxicating. I can't just. This is not a negotiation, he said, the softness in his voice making the words even more menacing. I am ensuring my mother has the best care. And I am ensuring her nurse is not distracted by trivialities like rent. He stood up, towering over her. Dante will be here in the morning to collect you. Pack a bag. He turned and walked away, leaving her with no choice at all. He wasn't saving her, he was acquiring her. The penthouse was a palace in the sky, a sprawling expanse of glass, chrome, and cold marble overlooking the city. It was breathtakingly beautiful and as sterile as an operating theater. Rose's room was larger than her entire apartment, with a private bathroom and a closet filled with clothes in her size, simple, elegant things in shades of cream, gray, and blue. It was a gilded cage, and Dante, Lorenzo's silent, hulking lieutenant, was her warden. He was a constant, unnerving presence, polite but watchful, his eyes missing nothing. Her days fell into a new rhythm, caring for Sophia, who was slowly, miraculously, beginning to emerge from her fog. She would smile at Rose's songs, even whisper a word or two. It was rewarding work, but the isolation was profound. Lorenzo was a ghost in his own home, often gone for days, and when he was there, he was a storm cloud of brooding intensity, his conversations with her brief and transactional. One afternoon, a specialist appointment for Sophia required them to leave the fortress. Rose sat in the back of a black, armored SUV with Sophia, while Dante rode in the front passenger seat. The city flashed by, a world away from the quiet opulence of the penthouse. They were turning onto a quieter side street when it happened. A garbage truck suddenly blocked the road ahead. Simultaneously, a black sedan screeched to a halt behind them, boxing them in. Lock down, Dante yelled, his hand already on his weapon. Before the words were even out, the world exploded in a cacophony of shattering glass and the percussive roar of gunfire. The driver slumped over the wheel, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Dante returned fire, the sound deafening inside the vehicle, but they were pinned. Sophia cried out a thin, terrified sound. Rose automatically threw herself over the older woman, shielding her with her own body as bullets peppered the reinforced windows, a deadly, metallic rain. Panic, hot and acidic, tried to claw its way up her throat, but something else, something cold and clear, pushed it back down. Chaos reigned inside the SUV. Dante was laying down, suppressing fire, but he was one man against what sounded like a small army. The driver was groaning, bleeding heavily from a wound in his shoulder. Sophia was whimpering beneath her. Rose's mind, instead of shattering, became a diamond. All the noise, all the fear, focused into a single, sharp point. Her nursing instincts took over first. "Dante, the driver needs pressure on that wound or he'll bleed out," she shouted over the din. "I can't," he yelled back, firing another burst through the shattered windshield. Without a second thought, Rose crawled over the seat, her body low. "Keep her down," Dante barked, but Rose was already moving. She reached the driver, her hands immediately finding the wound, applying firm, steady pressure just as she'd been trained. And that's when she saw it. In the chaos, her gaze flicked to the side mirror, then to the chrome bumper of the car in front of them, then to the polished glass of a bakery window across the street. A flicker of movement, a distorted reflection that didn't belong. It was a man, dressed in black, creeping along the wall of a narrow alleyway to their left, positioning himself for a flanking shot that would give him a clear angle on Dante. He was completely out of Dante's line of sight. Time seemed to slow. There was no room for doubt. Dante left. "Alleyway," she screamed, her voice cutting through the gunfire with absolute authority. Dante didn't hesitate. He trusted the command in her voice. He pivoted instantly, firing a controlled burst into the alley's mouth just as the attacker raised his weapon. The man crumpled to the ground. The momentary lull was all they needed. The shriek of sirens grew closer, and the remaining attackers scrambled back to their car and sped off. The silence that descended was deafening, broken only by the driver's pained breathing. Dante turned, his face pale, his eyes wide with a new, startling respect as he looked at Rose, who was still calmly applying pressure to the wound, her small hands covered in blood. Moments later, 2 more black SUVs screeched onto the scene. Lorenzo erupted from the first one before it had even stopped moving. He was a vision of cold, controlled fury, his eyes scanning the scene, taking in the bullet-riddled vehicle, the downed attacker, the blood. But his entire focus narrowed and locked onto Rose as Dante helped her out of the car. He crossed the distance in 3 long strides, his hands grabbing her, turning her, his eyes sweeping over her from head to toe, searching for injury. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice a raw, guttural sound she had never heard before. "No, I'm fine," she said, her voice shaking now that the danger was past. "Sophia is safe. The driver is wounded but stable." He wasn't listening. His thumb brushed a smear of blood from her cheek, his touch both terrifyingly possessive and exquisitely gentle. He had seen the last moments of the attack on the live security feed from the vehicle. He had heard her voice, clear and commanding, saving his best man's life. He pulled her against his side, his arm a band of steel around her, and issued a string of rapid, brutal orders in Italian. Back at the penthouse, the atmosphere was thick with violence. Lorenzo had Rose wait in the library while he dealt with the fallout. Hours later, he came for her. He led her to the main living area. A man was kneeling on the expensive rug, flanked by 2 of Lorenzo's guards. He was young, arrogant, his face bruised but defiant. "Marco Falcone," Lorenzo said, his voice dangerously soft. He thought he could make a statement. Marco's eyes landed on Rose, standing beside Lorenzo. A sneer twisted his lips. "This is what you're about now, Romano? Hiding behind your mother's nurse? You letting a little girl give your men orders?" The air went still. Lorenzo didn't raise his voice. He took a slow step toward Marco. That little girl, he said, his voice a low whisper of pure menace, is worth more than your entire bloodline. You did not just attack my car. You threatened what is mine. His subsequent punishment of Marco was not swift. It was a cold, systematic dismantling of a man's pride and future, a lesson delivered with chilling precision. He made it clear to everyone present that the ultimate sin was not attacking him, but showing disrespect to her. When it was over, and the ruined Marco Falcone had been dragged away, the vast penthouse was silent again. The guards had melted away, leaving only Lorenzo and Rose in the cavernous living room. The adrenaline from the ambush had long since faded, leaving behind a raw, vibrating tension that shimmered in the air between them. Rose stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the distant city lights. Lorenzo stood by the fireplace, his jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and covered in intricate tattoos. He hadn't spoken a word to her since they'd left the library. Finally, he moved, crossing the room to stand behind her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. When I saw the car was hit, he began, his voice rough, stripped of all its usual control. When I heard the gunfire on the comms, I thought. He stopped, his jaw tightening. When I heard your voice, telling Dante where to shoot, I saw you, not the nurse, not the quiet girl. I saw the steel in you. He placed his hands on her shoulders, turning her to face him. His eyes were dark, burning with an intensity that stole her breath. Seeing you in danger, Rose, it clarified everything. I would burn this entire city to the ground to keep you safe. The confession was stark, violent, and more terrifyingly tender than any gentle word. This was never about my mother, he admitted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. She was the excuse. I have been obsessed with you since the moment I saw you sing to her. That kindness, I didn't think it was real. And then today, that strength. You are a contradiction that makes my world make sense. He lifted a hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. You are not my mother's nurse, Rose. You are my Grazia, my Grace. And you are mine. The declaration settled over her not as a threat, but as a profound, earth-shattering truth. He didn't want to own her body. He wanted to possess her soul, her strength, her very essence. Weeks melted into a month, then 2. The penthouse was no longer a cage. It was a kingdom, and Rose was slowly, surely, learning the shape of her throne. She no longer wore scrubs. Tonight, she wore a simple, elegant dress of emerald silk that matched the fire in Lorenzo's eyes when he looked at her. Sophia Romano, now sitting in a comfortable armchair by the fire, smiled as Rose adjusted the blanket over her lap. The old woman's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous, her mind sharp, her wit returning, her bond with Rose a source of quiet joy in the formidable home. Dante no longer shadowed Rose as a guard. He moved with her as an aide, treating her questions with the gravity he gave Lorenzo's commands. She had a mind for detail, a way of seeing the patterns in things, the small tells in a person's behavior, the subtle flaws in a plan. Lorenzo had begun to include her in his meetings, initially just as a silent presence at his side. But her quiet observations, whispered to him later, had proven so incisive that he now sought her counsel openly. She never had to think about rent again. She never had to worry about anything but the vast, complex, and dangerous world she now inhabited. Her power had not been given to her. It had been there all along, dormant, waiting for someone to see it. Lorenzo came to stand behind her, his hands resting on her waist as they both looked at his mother. The transport logistics for the Naples shipment are sloppy, Rose said quietly, her voice calm and confident. The timings are predictable. It's a vulnerability. Lorenzo didn't look at the files. He looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. He saw not the poor, frightened girl from the hospital, but a queen in the making. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against her temple. Then you will fix them, he murmured, his voice a low thrum of adoration and absolute trust. He felt her nod, a small, decisive gesture of acceptance. She was home. He had seen her, and in being seen, she had become magnificent. His hand tightened on her waist, a possessive, grounding touch. Mine, he whispered, not as a claim, but as a prayer. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If you were captivated by Rose's journey from invisibility to power and the fierce devotion she inspired, please show your support. Like this video, share it with a friend who loves a story of strength and passion, and subscribe to the channel for more tales of dark romance where underestimated heroines find their voice and their throne. Don't forget to leave a comment below telling us your favorite moment. Was it the song in the quiet hospital room, the chaos of the ambush, or the final, quiet declaration of belonging? We love hearing from you and look forward to bringing you the next chapter in a world of danger and desire.